Chapter 16, The Civil War. Section 2, The War in the East. I want you to picture this. Wagon train pulls up on a nice grassy hill with lots of trees. People start getting off the wagons, men with their top hats, women with their big dresses and umbrellas. Children come out, they lay out a picnic blanket, get out the food, get the basket up, pull out snacks and stuff. And then you sit down to look out onto the vast field in front of you to watch a battle. That's exactly what happened with the first major battle of the Civil War, which became known as the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas. Manassas is actually the city in which the battle took place. Bull Run is actually a creek that runs through. So the First Battle of Bull Run is the first major battle of the Civil War. So you have the two sides, the Union and the Confederates. The Union were led by a guy named General Irwin McDowell, as you see in this picture right here. This is Irvin McDowell. He had 35,000 Union soldiers. The Confederates were led by a general named Pierre G.T. Beauregard and 22,000 Confederate soldiers. And the first battle will take place here. The First Battle of Bull Run would be an important attempt to capture the city of Manassas for the Union, because it would give them the best route to get to the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. So the Union started off really strong. They were winning some of the early skirmishes in the battle. And they actually were forcing the Confederates to retreat. That's until a man on a horse on top of a hill stood there strong against the Union advance. And the Confederates who were retreating screamed, "There's Jackson, standing like a stone wall. Rally behind the Virginians." And so they gathered up behind Stonewall Jackson here, Thomas Jackson. And then they proceeded to gather themselves and push forward against the Union advance, counterattacking and forcing the Union to retreat. Now the problem for the Union, when forced to retreat, the road that they were trying to get out of was clogged by the spectators who had come out for their picnic lunch and watched the battle. They were running in panic when the battle switched sides and started changing. The spectators are trying to run, so they're clogging the streets with all their wagons and panic going on. And the Union soldiers were in disarray at that point, running in all sorts of directions. And so this was a huge victory for the Confederacy, the first victory for them. Thomas Jackson, by the way, received the name Stonewall from that moment when the retreating Confederates saw him standing on the hill with his horse and not budging. Bull Run convinced Lincoln that the Army needed to be better trained. And so he will put a man named George McClellan in charge of the Union Army. The Union Army was nicknamed the Army of the Potomac because the Potomac River flows right by Washington, D.C., and he will lead the Union soldiers in a campaign called the Peninsular Campaign. And this was an effort to capture Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy. Unfortunately for McClellan, he was a careful person, so he wanted to make sure his troops were really trained, and he spent months training the Union soldiers. And he overestimated the size of the Confederate Army, so he was just too worried to attack at the point where he was at. He just felt like the troops just weren't ready. He can't attack. Eventually, Lincoln got impatient and forced McClellan to finally launch an attack on the Confederacy to capture Richmond. So thus, we have the Peninsular Campaign. Now, if you look at the map here, McClellan has gone his way from Washington, D.C. and made his way down. He's kind of doing a roundabout way to get to Richmond. Here's Richmond right here. If you see this path, he's kind of going a roundabout way. That kind of got Lincoln a little upset as well, because McClellan's kind of stalling, in a sense, from attacking. But he does make his way around to attack Richmond. Anyway, fearing that McClellan would receive reinforcements, Stonewall Jackson is going to launch his own attack on toward the capital of Washington, D.C. So McClellan would not receive the reinforcements that he had hoped for. McClellan was on the doorsteps of Richmond. That's when the Confederates will put General Robert E. Lee in charge of the Confederate forces, and he will launch a series of attacks on Union forces that became known as the 7 Days Battles. This happened right outside of Richmond. You can kind of see with this X right here where the battle took place. So, I mean, it's really close to Richmond, Virginia. And those battles forced the Union to retreat in 1862. So McClellan's troops were retreating from Richmond. Lincoln was so frustrated that he ordered another general, John Pope, to march directly on Richmond. Don't go the roundabout way that McClellan did. Go straight toward Richmond. And Jackson wanted to defeat Pope's army before they could meet up with McClellan at any point to make it a larger army of the Potomac. So Jackson's troops are going to stop the Union troops, led by Pope, before they can meet up with McClellan at a place that we all know, Manassas, once again, and this was the second battle of Bull Run in 1862. This is John Pope right here. Robert E. Lee wanted to follow up his successes against the Union troops down by Richmond with an attack on the north. So he will invade, if you will, the north by going into Maryland and meeting up with McClellan's Union army along a creek called Antietam Creek. This battle is also known as the Battle of Sharpsburg, because that's the name of the town that the battle took place. But they will meet along Antietam Creek in Maryland on September 17th, 1862. The Battle of Antietam became the bloodiest single-day battle in U.S. history. Not only the Civil War, but U.S. history. More soldiers were killed and wounded at the Battle of Antietam than the deaths of all Americans in the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Mexican War combined. Now, both sides lost thousands of men, but the Union will consider it a victory because they stop Robert E. Lee from advancing further north, and they push Robert E. Lee back into the South. Once again, Lincoln will not be happy with George McClellan because once Lee starts to retreat, McClellan doesn't send skirmish lines to go chase down Robert E. Lee. He lets Robert E. Lee basically escape. That will not sit well with Abraham Lincoln. So we've been talking about battles on land, but now we're going to move to the seas, where the United States Navy had the majority of the ships. The Union or the Confederacy, they hardly had any ships. And so the Union Navy controlled the seas, and they blockaded several southern ports. That was one of the three-pronged goals of Winfield Scott when he came up with his plan to defeat the Confederacy, was blockading southern ports. That would hurt the southern economy because they really depended on trade, especially from Europe. And by blockading their ports, they would not get the basic supplies that they needed. This is a political cartoon on Winfield Scott's whole idea of blockading southern ports, and they call it Scott's Great Snake. And the snake is basically the blockade, so it's blockading all the southern ports here as it winds around, preventing any ship from getting into those ports. The Confederacy was hoping to take away any Union advantage at sea. And so what they will do is devise a new type of battleship called an ironclad. It's a ship that's heavily armored with iron. And what they basically do is they take an old wooden ship and put the iron along and cover the old wooden ship up with the iron to make this ironclad. So what they did was they captured an old Union ship called the Merrimac, and they turned it into an ironclad called the Virginia. And the Union, once they found out about this, will create their own ironclad called the Monitor, and they will meet near a place called Hampton Roads, Virginia, and force the Confederates to retreat. Now, it was kind of a draw, really, because basically you're just bouncing cannonballs off each other and just hitting the iron and bouncing off. So it was really a draw, but the Confederates were the first to retreat, so the Union is going to claim victory for this. So if you're looking at the picture here, this is the Monitor right here, and this is the Merrimac or the Virginia, whatever you call it. Merrimac would have been the Union ship, but the Virginia is the new name of the Confederate ironclad. That is the end of Section 2.